What if the man who smiled at children, who offered them sweets and gently patted their heads, was the same man who would later dissect their bodies on a cold stone table? Imagine arriving in Auschwitz on a packed cattle car in the spring of 1943, exhausted and terrified, and seeing an impeccably dressed SS officer with polished boots and a white glove, his hand moving with casual precision, left, right, deciding in an instant who would live to work and who would die within hours. This was Dr. Josef Mengele, and this was his daily routine. By the time the war ended in 1945, this single man had personally overseen the deaths of hundreds of thousands in the gas chambers and had turned the medical barracks of Auschwitz into a laboratory of unimaginable horror. Between May 1943 and January 1945, Mengele conducted experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics. He injected dye into children's eyes to turn them blue, sewed twins together to create artificial Siamese pairs, and sent the organs of murdered victims to prestigious research institutes in Berlin. When Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, Mengele was already gone, fleeing first to Germany, then to South America, where he lived openly under his real name for years while the world's intelligence agencies tracked but never arrested him. He drowned in Brazil in 1979, never facing justice for the estimated 200,000 children whose lives he ended. This is the story of that man, the angel of death, and the crimes that forever stained the white coat of medicine. The selection ramp, Mengele's daily reckoning. From May 1943 until the liquidation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp system in January 1945, Dr. Josef Mengele stood on the selection ramp as trains arrived from across Nazi-occupied Europe. His position was that of camp physician, but his daily function was something far darker. He was the arbiter of life and death for hundreds of thousands of human beings. The process was chillingly efficient. As prisoners spilled out of cattle cars, men, women, children, the elderly, the sick, Mengele would stand with his white gloves and polished boots, his hand moving in a continuous, almost casual motion. A flick to the right meant slave labor, a temporary reprieve measured in weeks or months. A flick to the left meant the gas chamber within hours. Marie-Claude Vaillant-Couturier, a French prisoner who survived Auschwitz, testified at the Nuremberg trials about what she witnessed. Of transports carrying 1,000 to 1,500 people, rarely more than 250 were selected for work. The rest, the old women, the mothers with children, the sick, the weak, were loaded onto trucks and driven directly to the gas chambers. They were told nothing. To make the process more pleasant, an orchestra of young women in white blouses played gay tunes like The Merry Widow as new arrivals stepped onto the platform. They saw greenery, music, and a red brick building marked baths. They did not know that within 5 to 7 minutes of the doors closing, they would be dead. Mengele took particular interest in this process. He was not merely performing a duty, he was hunting. His eyes scanned the crowds, not just for the weak to be killed, but for the unusual to be saved. For his experiments. Twins, dwarfs, those with physical anomalies, people with differently colored eyes. These he would pluck from the stream of humanity destined for death and reserve for a slower, more intimate end. Survivor testimonies describe how he could be charming one moment, handing sweets to a twin child, and lethal the next, sending the child's parents to the gas without a second glance. This duality was central to his method. He cultivated trust in his young victims, presenting himself as Uncle Mengele, so they would cooperate in the horrors that awaited them. The selection ramp was not just a place of death, it was the hunting ground where Mengele chose his prey. The twin experiments, a laboratory of pain, Mengele's primary scientific obsession was twins. He believed that studying identical siblings held the key to unlocking the secrets of heredity, a central pillar of Nazi racial ideology. From May 1943 onward, he scoured incoming transports specifically for twins, ordering that they be pulled aside and housed in separate barracks, most notably Block 31 in the gypsy camp, which became known as the kindergarten. These children were given slightly better food and clean conditions. They were not beaten. Mengele visited them personally, distributing sweets and toys, presenting himself as a kind uncle. The children, desperate for any kindness, would run to greet him, calling him Uncle Mengele. This manufactured trust was essential to his work. The experiments began with measurements. Every millimeter of the twins' bodies was catalogued. Skull dimensions, eye spacing, ear shape, dental patterns, they were photographed endlessly. Blood samples were drawn in massive quantities, often causing children to faint. Spinal taps and bone marrow extractions were performed without anesthesia, procedures of such excruciating pain that even hardened medical professionals would hesitate. Mengele showed no hesitation. He deliberately infected one twin with typhus or other diseases to observe whether the other would sicken identically. He performed blood transfusions between twins, pumping blood from one child into the other to study reactions. The most grotesque experiments had no medical purpose whatsoever. In at least one documented case, Mengele sewed two twin boys together, back to back, attempting to create artificial Siamese twins. The children screamed for days as their bodies rejected the union, developing gangrene and sepsis before they died. When one twin died from an experiment or disease, Mengele would often kill the other with a fetal injection directly to the heart so that he could perform comparative autopsies. Dr. Miklos Nischli, a Hungarian Jewish pathologist, forced to work as Mengele's assistant, performed hundreds of these dissections. He described how Mengele would arrive at the autopsy table, examine the organs with scientific interest, and then leave, showing no more emotion than a professor reviewing a student's work. The bodies were then incinerated, and the organs, preserved in jars, were shipped to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin. In Mengele's laboratory, children were not patients. They were specimens, their suffering merely data points in a murderous research protocol. Eye experiments and the quest for blue eyes among Mengele's most horrific obsessions was the attempt to change eye color. Nazi ideology prized blue eyes as a marker of Aryan purity, and Mengele sought to discover whether brown eyes could be forcibly transformed into blue ones. His subjects were primarily children, blonde boys and girls with brown eyes who, in his twisted logic, were just one step away from the racial ideal. His method was direct and brutal. He injected chemical dyes, most commonly methylene blue, directly into the children's eyeballs. The procedure caused immediate, searing pain. Children would scream and writhe as the chemical burned their corneas and flooded their anterior chambers. Severe inflammation followed, conjunctivitis, iritis, in some cases corneal ulcers that left permanent scarring. Many children experienced temporary or permanent blindness. Some developed systemic infections as the chemical entered their bloodstream. One recorded victim, a little girl named Dagmar, born in Auschwitz in 1944, died directly from Mengele's eye injections. Others survived, but with damaged vision, their eyes never turning the desired blue. Mengele's interest in eyes extended beyond color change. He was also fascinated by heterochromia, the condition where a person has two differently colored eyes. He collected such individuals from incoming transports, keeping them alive specifically for study. Dr. Miklos Nischli documented a particularly chilling episode involving a Romani family of 8, all of whom had heterochromia. Mengele ordered that when these individuals died or were killed, their eyes must be extracted and sent to Berlin. As the family members died one by one from camp conditions, Nischli was called to remove their eyes. But when only 7 pairs had been collected, a camp scribe angrily demanded the 8th. The last family member had not yet died. Nischli, under pressure, was forced to scavenge substitute eyes from random Romani corpses, one blue, one black, to complete the order. This macabre substitution reveals the utter dehumanization at the core of Mengele's work. The eyes were not connected to individuals. They were simply specimens to be harvested. The children and adults they belonged to were merely temporary vessels. Noma and the children of the gypsy camp. From late 1943 through 1944, a horrific disease began spreading among children in the gypsy family camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Noma, also known as cancrum oris or gangrenous stomitis, is a rare and devastating condition that typically affects malnourished children with weak immune systems. It begins as a small sore in the mouth, then rapidly spreads, consuming the soft tissues of the face, the cheeks, the lips, the jaw. Children's faces literally rotted away while they were still alive. In the starvation conditions of the gypsy camp, Noma became almost epidemic. Mengele saw not a tragedy, but an opportunity. He established a special laboratory in Block 22 of the gypsy camp, staffed by 2 imprisoned physicians, Professor Berthold Epstein, a world-renowned pediatrician from Prague, and Dr. Rudolf Weisskopf-Wittek, a dermatologist. Their task was to study Noma, its causes, its progression, potential treatments. But Mengele's research methodology was twisted. Rather than providing adequate nutrition or sanitation to prevent the disease, he simply observed as children's faces disintegrated. He ordered experimental treatments, many of which were useless or harmful. And when children died, as most did, he ordered autopsies. Dr. Jan Češpida, a Czech physician imprisoned at Auschwitz, later testified about the horror. He described children with parts of their faces and eyes falling off, looking like lepers. He attempted to treat them with the camp's X-ray machine, but was blocked by SS doctors conducting sterilization experiments. Instead, the children's heads were severed after death, preserved in formalin, and sent to the SS Medical Academy in Graz, Austria, for further study. Approximately 10 such heads were prepared for a museum collection. The others simply disappeared into the camp's pathology network. Mengele's research on Noma produced no useful medical knowledge. It was not designed to heal. It was designed to observe suffering and death, to document the destruction of young bodies, and to harvest specimens for institutions that viewed these children as nothing more than biological anomalies. And the collection of twins were Mengele's primary, not his only subjects. Interest in individuals, dwarfs, peoples, those with unusual limps. When such sports, Mengele would sparing them from immediate death. This was not mercy. The Ovitz family, dwarfs from Romania, all 7 dwarfs survived Auschwitz because he subjected them as the twins, X-rays, blood draws. He photographed them, took samples of their hair. He was kept in slightly prisoners, but they lived on. Knew that when Mengele's interest killed and dissected. 7 survived the war. Mengele collected severe curvature limbs with any considered the normal humans were measured, documented. When Mengele had extracted, they were killed. Their organs preserved and prepared for shipment to Germany. The Kaiser Wilhelm in Berlin Dahlem packages from Auschwitz, eyes, organ, tissue sections, all of Mengele's mentor there, Professor, enthusiastic materials, praising their after the war, when confession, Verscher expressed anyone would eject. He's not the murdered people that and impunity. The Soviet forces advanced toward 1945. On January 7, just 10 days before, he fled westward, filled with his research records, the photographs, the specimen logs of victims living in the documentation of his crime. Stint at another camp, chaos of post-war Germany. He evaded capture, and in Bavaria, in 1949 smuggling network, he had in the name of Helmut Argentina. Once this, and began living classified Argentine intelligence agencies, and where he lived. He married his brother family, ran a medical school, moved freely in Boy. When West Germany in 1959 rejected it, dismissing political persecution. Raided his home, Mengele, where a dictator granted protection. He spent his sheltered by Germans at beaches, attending, never hiding. In age 67, he and drowned. He was not until 19 international investigations his identity confirmed. The angel of death, small and pale, never faced his beard for the children whose eye blood he drained part on cold. His bones now sit used for forensic of Josef Mengele.